There's not that many of you here, but we're being videotaped for other uses, so I have to stand up here. Otherwise, I'd make you all come here and we'd sit in a little circle, and then we could just exchange stories about what you want to hear, as opposed to what I prepared. So why don't I just ask you, since there's only 5 or 6 of us here, what interests you most about the CFTC, if you know anything about it, but maybe just if you could just tell me if you're an affiliate, if you're a network, if you're a merchant, if you're an advertiser. Do you want to go ahead? You're press. Okay. Oh, okay. And how long have you been doing that?
Going on just about a year now.
Oh, great. And David? Okay. Ma'am? Affiliate network? There's no way I can read that from here. Even with my LASIK surgery, I can't see that. And can I ask you?
I don't know anything about CFTC.
Okay.
My primary interest is fraud. Protecting merchants from notifications.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's a whole topic we'll try to touch on. I'm going to try to touch on some of those things that are of interest to you. And why don't you just stop me if you want to talk about something more in depth, because you really have the room. David Deach is my partner. He's going to stay a little bit afterwards, just because something's come up, and I'm going to run after this is over. But we have a booth upstairs, power station booth, and David and my colleague Rachel will be up there answering any other questions you have. So the CFTC is the Commodity Future Trade Commission, and I didn't really know anything about it, other than I don't know if you saw that Dan Aykroyd movie, Trading Places. That's like the first time I learned about commodities. I mean, it's either pork barrels or oranges or wheat. It's just like, who cares, right? We have nothing to do with that in our day-to-day lives. But, affiliates, you talk about affiliates rolling out different markets. So binary options basically is an option where you can either essentially vote yes or no on a particular trade or on a particular investment. So the CFTC governs what I just said, what are commodities. So if you were to have a binary option that basically said, is the price of gold or the price of oranges, the price of pork bellies, going to be $5 at the end of today, yes or no, and then you rolled out that investment opportunity in the market, that would come potentially under CFTC jurisdiction, assuming that the CFTC otherwise had jurisdiction over this type of option. And the CFTC has said that it does have jurisdiction over that option. Now, binary options can also trade, can offer stock indices in financial markets. That's not a CFTC issue, that's a SEC issue. So for example, if a binary option wanted to say, will the price of Boeing be $100 at the end of the day, yes or no? That would not be a CFTC issue because it's not a commodity, but it is trading on a stock indice because Boeing is traded on a public stock market. So because of that, this SEC would have jurisdiction over it. Either way, the analysis is basically the same. This industry, over the years, I've spoken at affiliate, and typically we've been talking about the FTC. And what we talk about when we talk about the FTC is when you talk about affiliate liability for rogue affiliates for merchants, is how did they roll out a particular product? So can you give me an example of a product that your merchant might be producing or rolling out?
Yeah, let's say posting a website, so posting blogs.
Okay, posting blogs. We see, if you go upstairs, they have payday lenders, they have diet pills, they have mortgages, all of those types of things that you want to roll out through an affiliate. Okay, so the FTC comes in and basically takes a look at it and say, well, is the method of how you rolled this out honest? Is it true? Did you falsify, or were you deceptive somehow about the rate of return? Were you deceptive about the cost? Was there some sort of other product included? Was there some sort of term and condition that you did not include? That's what the FTC would look at. So let's just take a look at what the CFTC would look at. And again, we're dealing with the CFTC. And when I want to talk to you, I know a lot of you are familiar with the FTC and what the FTC can do to someone. So we're just going to use what you already know about the FTC and the affiliate space and compare it to what the CFTC does in the binary option space. Now, when I say the binary option space, the binary options employ affiliates as well. Obviously, there are folks here today who have white label solutions that trade off of platforms that are rolled out through affiliates. And upstairs right now, there are affiliates being approached about trading off this platform and helping to push out these investment opportunities. So that could theoretically come under FTC scrutiny, but as of this year, for the first time, we've seen actions now being taken against binary option companies, including liability for affiliates, and it's being brought by the CFTC. So, like I just said, this is if you're not familiar, this is a Prezi as opposed to a PowerPoint. It's the next generation of PowerPoint, but I'm just sort of getting comfortable with it. Sometimes it gets a little out of control and moves ahead of you. And you always have to remember, if you ever use this, by the way, to turn off the sleep hibernate function of your screen. And this isn't my computer, so I don't know how to do that. But otherwise, when you're presenting, the screen goes blank, and it's hard enough to maintain your attention, right? So the FTC has focused on false and deceptive nature of the product. So if you look at e-cigs, for example, they've talked about whether or not there were health-related concerns. The FDA has also talked about health-related concerns that might be false and deceptive when someone is rolling out an electronic cigarette product. The other thing that the FTC has focused on, especially very recently, is unsolicited communication methods. There's just a huge rash of cases. We're representing a defendant, 3 defendants in a huge case in Texas. There's just another one brought 2 weeks ago in the Northern District of Illinois in Chicago. And these are the method, this is the method of how you roll out your ad. So first we have the content, what the FTC looks at. Was it false and deceptive? Did your rogue affiliate say something about your product that he or she was not authorized to say? Did they say that it would give you 120 more years on your life? Did they say that you would suddenly lose 60 pounds? Was that something that they were rogue in doing because you didn't authorize to do them? That's the content. But also, how did they roll out that message, right? Did they send it out through a blast fax? Did they send it out through a text? Was the text to a customer who had not consented for that to receive that text? Was it through a robocall? Did they violate a do not call rule? Was the potential customer on a do not call line and nevertheless received a call? These implicate what's called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. The FTC brings, these are normally subject to class actions, but the FTC also brings private cases under the statute because they have the authority. There's also something known as the telephone sales rule and the telephone marketing rule, which are both under the TCPA, which prohibit the method of how we are allowed as affiliates or merchants to communicate with potential customers. And it's horrible, by the way. Treble damages, okay? So we have a client who rolled out, an affiliate who rolled out a product, 1.6 million texts, which the FTC would then say 1.6 million texts and multiply that times the cost of how much it costs a consumer to receive that text, $1. It varies with every single telephone carrier. So let's say it's $1 to receive a text on your plan, and then they treble that. And that's your starting point when you're sitting down to talk to them. So it's pretty crazy. So if you're watching, if you're a compliance person, I'm really saying this for you. If you're a compliance person, you want to look at let's look at their pages, let's look at what they're saying about our product, and then let's look at how they're rolling it out. And that's all FTC. Now, the CFTC regulates the sale of commodity and financial future options. So let's talk. We talked a little bit about what that means, but future contracts were originally for agricultural products. They've been traded in the U.S. for about 150 years, and they can include anything that's represented in this picture, from cotton to cattle to wheat to corn, and pork bellies. I don't really know what that is, but that's what they said in Trading Places, right? Okay. So so the idea here is that you're actually trading on an option. So that would mean that you're basically going to come in at a price that's being offered to the market, and you're going to hope that either you're going to be able to trade that option to someone else for a profit, or at least get rid of it at a time when you won't incur too much of a loss. Since the 1970s, commodities have expanded to include financial instruments, foreign currency, and stock indices. That's why the CFTC will take jurisdiction over the Forex industry. And the CFTC has brought cases in the Forex industry. We represent InstaForex, which was one of the domain names which was taken down by the CFTC. It's a very aggressive method to kick off an enforcement effort. I was upstairs and someone said to me, well, how will I know if the CFTC or the FTC are looking at me? Do they send me a letter at first and say, hey, we're concerned about something you're doing? I'm like, no, they just take down your website. So, you wake up one day and your website doesn't work, and your bank accounts are all of a sudden potentially seized, and your customers don't have anywhere to go to you. And in a market like this one, where I'm sure there's a competing product or two or three or four, right? I'm sure you all have at least 50 competitors, some of whom are upstairs. If your domain name goes down and your customers aren't redirected somewhere, that's a disaster, right? I mean, how much do you pay, if you can think of, just to get those customers and get those leads? And then you lose them overnight.
Can the CFTC take claim over something that's non.com? Is the reason why they're able to shut down your domain is because it's .com. So, for example, .uk, but they still have that jurisdiction.
So it's a very good question. So the way that they take down a domain name is by either going to the registrar or the registry, both of which are in the United States if it's a .com. But it's true, with the rollout of additional GTLDs, there are going to be different extensions, some of which are not going to be subject to U.S. jurisdiction, and as a result, those .whatevers, .uk, those other .marketplaces, wherever they are, .nl, for example, is very, very popular because that's considered one of the jurisdictions, the Netherlands, that doesn't comply and recognize U.S. enforcement methods. The problem, of course, with those types of extensions is that it's very difficult to build up liquidity in a customer base when you're using some sort of strange exchange. There are ways around that. Some people have their .coms redirected to their .uk's and .nls, and it's not a sure thing that those sites can be taken down. But look, the advantage of a .uk is that in the UK, binary options are legal, and if you're properly registered with the UK, it's very unlikely that the UK authority is going to recognize a takedown notice from a US jurisdiction on the basis that it's illegal. So now, because the sale of so many financial and investment instruments are conducted online, affiliates have come under the scrutiny of the CFTC also. All of the things that the FTC can do, the CFTC can do and does in this market of binary options. So, if you have any type of product that promises any type of financial returns or is the equivalent of some sort of investment, or you market it as if it's an investment, the CFTC and the SEC can take jurisdiction over that product. You can argue later about whether they really, truly have jurisdiction. I mean, there's an argument that can be made that they do not have jurisdiction over binary options, for example. However, one of the things that they'll look to, just like the FTC would do in their proceeding, how did you represent the product to the market? Did you tell people it was an investment? Did you tell people they could become traders? Did you tell people this was a Wall Street initiative? Because if you did, it's going to be very difficult to come back and say, well, that wasn't really true. It was just a marketing sales pitch. Which basically is the way these things are marketed. So you have to know about this. And the other thing is, of course, another way out, potentially binary options, which we can talk about, is arguing that they're just gaming, that they're just illegal gaming. Now, of course, that may get you out of trouble with the CFTC, who doesn't have jurisdiction over it, but I don't know that you want to go into court and argue what we're doing is illegal, Judge, but it's the wrong regulator, so we got to change the plaintiff. That's not a very helpful argument. So which affiliates are regulated by the CFTC? So foreign currency trading contracts, Forex, like I said, they've had several cases. This is not as common because the Forex market has basically left the U.S. to the large degree. The way that the CFTC initiated these cases was by doing takedowns, taking down a domain completely. They were charging violations for trading at $125,000 per violation. Some of these cases settled for very low amounts, $250, or increments of $125,000. Well, I mean, they didn't bring any of those cases against the affiliates, but I mean, under their substantial assistance rule, they could have brought the cases against the affiliates, but they didn't. These cases were directly brought against the Forex trading company itself. So currency trading, employment opportunities, and binary options, which is what we've been talking about. Again, if you go onto any binary option site, you're going to see various graphs of how financial ticker tickets, and it's very, very difficult to say, well, yeah, but this wasn't really a financial investment. We really weren't telling people that this was a real market. So what is the CFTC looking for? They definitely, both the CFTC, if it's a commodity, and the SEC, if it's a financial instrument, will definitely look and definitely talk about in their complaint the deceptive nature of advertising. I mean, in the binary option market, I'm not picking on that market, it's just that this is really the core focus of what this is about. If you go onto a typical binary option site, you're going to see discussions about becoming a Wall Street trader, about how many U.S. employees the company has, about U.S. servers being located in New York City. Most of the time, as far as my experience, this is all not true. So why do they do it? Because most of these binary option companies are skins, and most of them are looking to try to take as much market share as possible away from the other, and most of them figure, I assume, that consumers would be more attractive and attracted to a site that was in the U.S., had a U.S. presence, was on Wall Street, and was even in New York City, the center of the financial markets. So the CFTC, like the FTC would do, will make a big deal about this. Now, the difference, of course, is that when the FTC brings one of those cases, the deceptive nature of the advertisement is usually material to the consumer's decision to invest or to buy. In the CFTC case, or in the SEC case, it's not. It's really hard for them to make a case that says, hey, because you said that you were in New York and that you were in Wall Street and that you had 500 employees, that was the only reason that I decided to invest on your site. Very, very difficult, and the CFTC and the SEC have, in fact, not taken that position, but boy, it's enough mudslinging to make you look really bad on your first day in court, that's for sure. The FTC, on the other hand, normally takes the deceptive nature of that advertising. So if you have a rogue affiliate who's been making claims that they cannot substantiate, that's going to really hurt you because those tend to be material and those tend to be very, very relevant to why the consumer decided to buy the diet pill, right? Or decided to apply for the mortgage. It's really the promise and the allure. One of the things that you'll see that's common to all three of these agencies is the vulnerable victim argument. They all make arguments that the people that this whole market is really appealing to are very vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they don't have jobs, because they're overweight, because they don't have credit, because they have credit card problems, because they need debt relief. So all of those consumers out there do overlap, and you will see all three agencies, including the CFTC and the SEC, making arguments about how the binary option industry is taking advantage of these vulnerable victims. The financial returns are the most important, so to the extent, and you don't really see this in the binary option market as far as I know. Of course, there could be rogue affiliates that are out there doing who knows what, but overall, the financial returns that are promised in the binary option market are accurate. Now, whether or not a consumer can actually gain the market in a way where they're winning, that's up to the odds and up to their skill. But I haven't really seen a binary option site that's promised financial returns that have been alleged to have been fraudulent because they're impossible. There may not be a majority of customers who share that experience, but that doesn't make it fraudulent. The FTC, on the other hand, has alleged in cases that the financial returns that were promised were, in fact, purely fraudulent. So in the recent TCPA case where defendants were claiming that you could receive a $1,000 gift card from Walmart if you hit this link, that was considered to be fraudulent because, in fact, there were no gift cards available. And it's very interesting. The FTC used as an argument that since there were 1.6 million texts that were sent by this one defendant, it can't be that there were $1.6 million gift cards, 1.6 million gift cards valued at $1,000, because that would mean that that there were hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gift cards purchased by this defendant who lived in his basement. Basically, if consumers lose money and complain, the CFTC can and will pursue you, even if you have to try to qualify the prospects and explain the risks. It's interesting. The CFTC has a really dedicated enforcement division. They've got, very similar to the FTC, the FTC has their regional headquarters in Washington, D.C. But they have regional offices all over the country, and those regional offices have enforcement divisions with staff attorneys, and the CFTC works the same way, and so does the SEC. Now, at the end of the day, they report back to Washington, which is where I'm based, to their headquarters, but they have what they call their field offices, where these attorneys will bring these cases. So these cases are brought all over the country. The current binary option case that was filed is in Las Vegas. It's not really clear against bank to binary. It's not really clear why it was brought in Las Vegas. The SEC office handling it is in LA, and the CFTC office handling it is split between Washington and Texas. So it's again, they can bring these in any court they want to. The regional offices are all over the country. Now, someone upstairs, again, turning back to some of the questions we hear from affiliates, how will I know when I'm about to get in trouble? So, I always tell people, it's the same thing from the FTC as the CFTC. If you've got some consumers who are writing to you complaining, they tend to go to you first. They really are going to turn to you first. So if you're worried about compliance with affiliate fraud, what's the best way to identify that? The best way is to check the mail that's coming in your front door, or the emails that are going to wherever it is you direct them. And maybe it's just info@x.com. I don't know where you direct people. I don't know where they're going to find a place to write. But I will tell you, I would feel comfortable saying that 10 times out of 10, when we see declarations from consumers that are attached to CFTC complaints and FTC complaints, the consumers always say, and we always verify, that they did previously complain. Now, what are they complaining about? I mean, basically, they want all their money back. So I know that nobody in this room is going to say, we're willing to do that. But you've got to engage these people. You've got to have a response. That is always the first point. I'm not saying that you're going to go and settle with every single person who writes you a letter. Obviously, we prefer you don't settle. You hire a lawyer and litigate if you need to. But consumers are always the first. You're not going to hear from the CFTC, most likely. And you're not going to hear from the FTC. What you're going to hear is from consumers. And when the consumers complain and when they get frustrated, they end up running to these field offices, and they do get authority to file complaints. And it doesn't have to be a lot of people. In the bank to binary case, it was only 4 or 5 consumers that ended up bringing what was, a humongous case alleging hundreds of millions of dollars of profits to be disgorged. And in the FTC case, it's a very similar thing. In fact, one of the things David and I are litigators, and one of the things that we see, what's very interesting, is that the first thing that the agency does after they bring a case is they send you a letter, say, send us a list of all your consumers. Send us a list of all the phone numbers you sent stuff to. Why are they doing that? Because they don't know. They don't know. They have a sense of what it is. They have a sense of what it is from their agents. But they don't actually know because they've only got 4 or 5 of these people. But they believe when they see it that they've seen enough to know that there must be, where there's smoke, there's fire. So that's going to be a big thing. And look, if you're in an industry where consumers are losing money and you're making money, yeah, on the one hand, that's America. But to these regulators, that's bad. That's bad news for these vulnerable consumers. And so that makes you actually vulnerable to action from these regulators. Now, when I say this, compared to the CFTC, the FTC is a nice guy. And I'll explain why I say that. Because each agency has different ways of settling these cases. And the CFTC is probably the worst. The FTC takes into consideration your ability to pay when assessing damages. What happens is the FTC will come in and they will say, give us the list of the customers, give us the list of sales, let's see how much money you make, let's see how much money is in your bank account. They may even initiate some seizures in connection with their complaint. They may even get a TRO, which is an injunction where the judge will issue that injunction and may potentially seize your bank accounts without you even having notice. Now, you get notice, and then you can come back and argue that, but try to convince that judge that he or she made a mistake. Good luck. Now, once all that happens, though, the FTC kind of has a good picture of how much you have left, and whatever they've seized is never going to be close to what you made. It just never happens that way, because most people in this industry, just like in life, don't just keep all their money in a bank account. And if you're doing that, you really should stop, because it's dumb. When the CFTC or the FTC come in, they basically tend to be very upset about how much is actually in the coffers of the business or the individual at issue. And so what do they do then? Well, what the FTC does is basically takes an approach, and they basically ask you for financial disclosure statements, assuming you're going to settle, right? I mean, of course, you don't have to settle these cases, but I'm just talking about the context where you do settle. So assuming you settle, they're going to look at how much money you have, what's your financial ability to pay. And then they're going to look at the financial ability to pay, and they're going to say, okay, this is how much we have. This is what you got. You got a house. You got some cars. You had a lot of expenses in connection with this business. And let's face it, there's a lot of expenses. I mean, the FTC doesn't always necessarily appreciate that for you to make X, you got to pay a whole bunch of people Y, like the people upstairs. I mean, a merchant is not necessarily clearing, I mean, on any day, 60, 70% of the sales, I mean, that the dollars are going to a whole bunch of people, including affiliates, including sub-affiliates, including all these other types of expenses, including the advertising campaign, and so on. Now, they're not necessarily sympathetic to that, but at the end of the day, what is the FTC going to do? If you don't have the money and they've seized whatever's left and there's nothing left and there's nothing to sell, they basically go away. Now, there are some other things they can do. They can impose terms and bans. They can tell you for the next 20 years, that's the thing they usually roll out, you're going to have to report to us whenever you open a new site, whenever you open a new company. So they might have a reporting requirement that goes on forever. But as to the fine, they're pretty good about basically working with you, assuming that you've honestly disclosed, and working within that parameter. The CFTC, on the other hand, is not. They take everything you have plus what you don't have. What does that mean? How do they take what you don't have? The way they take what you don't have is they basically say, listen, I'm going to look at the entire campaign. I'm going to see how much you made, and that's going to be your damages, right? So we had a case of two guys who ran an affiliate financial investment scheme, and they opened it up to 10 or 15 people. The total taken in through all these investments, including their own, was $3.5 million, and it went under. The whole scheme, the whole investment went under, which on any good day, that can happen, right? So the whole thing went under. They lost $3.5 million. The two guys lost their house, and they were living literally in a trailer down by the river, right? Like the Chris Farley man, not as big as him, and they didn't squash tables or anything, but they lived in a van down by the river, okay? The CFTC serves them a complaint. The CFTC was scared to go to their house, to the van, because it was down by the river in an area that was very dangerous. So they actually had two agents go out there, meet the FBI field agent. They went to serve these guys the complaint. Now, we got hired by these two poor guys, and as we were working with the CFTC, they made it very clear that they did not ever want to go down to where these guys lived again. So, we're like, yeah, I know, it's terrible, thinking, of course, that I'm beginning to develop empathy with the government regulator, right? Well, when it came time to discuss a settlement, which is all we could discuss because we're basically representing these guys pro bono, they literally have nothing, the CFTC said, okay, well, here's the settlement, and the settlement was for an admission for $3.5 million of damages, the total amount invested. And I'm like, what? Like, these guys live in a van down by the river. You're scared to go there. How could you impose $3.5 million of damages? Well, that's the amount that everybody lost. I mean, there were some really issues that could have been litigated there. But again, these guys didn't have any money. So what they basically will tell you is that we don't enforce our judgments. So if you sign this $3.5 million, nothing's going to happen. Okay? It's going to go get filed with the court, but we won't send it. We don't have an enforcement division that collects and enforces our judgments. They have an enforcement division, but not one that enforces their judgments, a collections unit. The U.S. Attorney's Office has a collections unit, the FTC has a collections unit, and so does the SEC. The CFTC claims it does not. And in every single case, they've told me that. We've had 7 cases with them so far. They always say that. It's a very odd thing, because they will tell you as a defendant, if God forbid you're ever one, they'll tell you that too. I mean, when my clients come and tell me this is what the CFTC said, I'm like, no, you got to be mistaken. That's got to be wrong. That's what they do. And it's gotten so bad, I think David, my partner Dave, was on the phone with the SEC the other day and talking about a settlement, and the SEC told him, oh, well, yeah, of course the CFTC does that because they don't enforce their judgments. And so it's become very well known that the CFTC doesn't enforce their judgments. Well, the downside of that, of course, is, that's a lot of trust to give the man. And, for anyone who's smart, who doesn't trust the man, you don't want to do that. But that's why dealing with the CFTC is so difficult and so complicated, because they've just got it down that it's like a check. They're just checking boxes. They're not listening to reasoning. They're not listening to stories. They can go down and see 2 guys who've lost all their money, their house, their cars, and live in a van by the river, and then give them a settlement agreement for $3.5 million. It doesn't even faze them because in their heads, they're never going to collect it. What guarantee do you have that they're never going to collect it? Zero. They can come after you at any time. Any U.S. attorney could take up that judgment and come after you for anything for the rest of your life. This is always going to follow you, unlike with the FTC. Now, the FTC has its own problems. I mean, they even if you don't have the money, they're going to impose a very long-term ban or a reporting requirement on you, which is a huge hassle. So they may be equivalent in some ways, but not in this way. Yeah, David. Right. No, it's very true, and what we've done with clients who don't have the money is what we've told them is, listen, let's at least invest in moving to dismiss the complaint, because the CFTC brings these cases as fraud cases, and under the rules, a fraud case has to be brought with extreme specificity and particularity. You have to know the what, where, how, and why, and a lot of times the CFTC, and in this case with the van down by the river, they actually filed a response that said, we're not subject to Rule 9. We don't have to do this with specificity. That doesn't apply to us. Now, the judge in Mississippi hasn't ruled on that yet, but I think that there is a way to invest in a smart way to at least take a chance on trying to cut them back. I think the only way you can get anywhere with them is to show them that you mean business and that you've actually got someone who's going to file something and take you to court on it. And the last thing I would hope that they want to do is create bad precedent. So in the binary option case, I mean, David drafted an extremely complicated motion to dismiss, arguing that these binary options are in fact not options subject to CFTC jurisdiction, or at least in the alternative, were not options until the Dodd-Frank amendments passed in October 2012. So what does that do? That kind of kills their damages, because if they can't get damages until October 2012, and you've only been trading for 4 months like the defendant in that case, I mean, what are they talking about? Now, going forward in a couple years, that argument will go away, but, you always want to look for that initial thing. Other than that, I will tell you, these guys are not scared. These guys are not scared to tell judges to impose default judgments, and judges do it. We have a case that's on appeal in the Ninth Circuit in California where a guy was sued by the CFTC and the SEC for an online financial investment scheme. And all his money was seized up front, so he went into court and had a lawyer who made a motion to get money from the money that was seized so that he could pay to represent this defendant. So the judge said denied, left him without a lawyer, and then the agency moved for summary judgment. And the guy had no lawyer. He didn't even know what summary judgment was. And the judge entered it, summary judgment, entered against him. And then they entered total damages in that case on a default basis with no evidence was what? $13 million. And the SEC, it has damages that they're alleging for the same amount. Right, they want the same damages, and they're not willing to offset each other, and they're not willing to say that this is joint liability. Nothing. They want separate, and they're going to, when you get these people who have lost all their money in this way, and they get dragged into court with these cases where you can't get anything, for engaging. Yeah, well, I mean, most of the time, the CFTC and the SEC don't really look at, the risks that the consumer took in investing in the option. It's, again, in the FTC cases, because you have this deceptive advertising that is kind of so paramount, you can't really make arguments about the consumer because they're going to say, well, the consumer was misled. But in the CFTC and SEC cases, it's a very good point because, and that's why in these cases, we haven't really seen, the financial incentive cases are one thing because those investment schemes are pretty bad. And the promises that were made were pretty bad. Whether the defendants believed them is another issue. I mean, I think this guy actually believed his product worked. He had developed an algorithm that he actually believed in, but it didn't work and they lost a lot of money. But in the binary option cases, I mean, the consumers, there's no issue with the consumers. They're not even truly complaining.
The big difference is with these SEC case, often what they
Yeah, with the SEC, I mean, if you're offering any type of financial investment, I mean, or if you're offering a binary option scheme where there's a stock indices are at issue, I mean, that you need to register as a broker dealer. Now, most of these skins are saying, well, we're just introducing brokers because it's not our platform, it's someone else's. That doesn't help you. Now, the cost of being registered is not very significant. The cost of not being registered are these cases. And by the way, you would think, what is that? What kind of violation is that, not being registered? I mean, how much could that cost? Well, they're asking for disgorgement of all trades, everything, as a violation. So it's huge. It's the whole company. On the CFTC side, it's an issue of whether or not what you're offering as a commodity is on an exchange, on a recognized exchange. It's very difficult for any of these offshore binary option companies ever really, truly offering a product that's on an exchange. By their nature, they're overseas. It's not on exchange. And because it's off exchange, it's subject to exceptions. If it was a foreign exchange, there might be a way to register that exception, but they're not even trying to do it.
Well, the exception of Bank of Binary, who is a regulated partner of CySec, the Cyprus Exchange Commission, whatever. I believe they have a market maker status where they have a certain fund which they pay in, so aren't they creating an artificial market that, and at least Cyprus is a legitimate trading.
Yeah, and so if they had gone forward and they did try to initially try to get that recognized under this exception for a foreign board of trade, if that had been recognized, then there might be a whole different story. But the problem is it wasn't recognized, and the other problem is in the U.S. You have a market created, an exchange that's run by Nadex, who spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build up that exchange. Who's not doing very well apparently, and who's behind all these cases. So again, it's different than the FTC because you don't have this massive monster, who's out there, who's pushing for the enforcement, and it's a real problem. So I don't know that there's a quick fix in terms of mitigating liability in the binary option market. I mean, certainly registering with the SEC, getting rid of commodities offerings from your offering would be a way, or getting involved with CySec and trying to figure out whether or not there's a way for them to to register as a foreign exchange. And that just kind of brings us to 5 ways that the affiliates can manage their risk. So, these are kind of simple, but don't promise large profits. Sorry. These will be used against you, and any agency we're dealing with, when you promise large profits, will be used against you. You always have to educate the consumers on the risk. I think the binary option market's pretty good about this, actually. I think that this isn't really in the fine print. It's not like the old days of some of the affiliates and the FTC campaigns where you couldn't really find where the risk was. I think that in the binary option market, it's pretty clear, and I also think that when you start trading, you pretty immediately recognize what's at issue and what's at risk. So in terms of offering margin trading, that's one of the issues that comes up. You really need to explain, what that term means. One of the things that was very interesting in the CFTC case is that you couldn't find who to complain to. They couldn't find some of these companies. That comes up a lot of times in the FTC cases as well, and that's why I was saying earlier, you want to be able to have contact information, and more importantly, don't establish a contact for correspondence if there's no one checking that contact, because that's worse. Then you've got the allegation that hundreds of complaints were sent in and never responded to. And so, you should have contact information, and you should respond to that correspondence. You should develop some means internally of how to respond to those consumer complaints. Now, in any type of market where you're an affiliate, so for the affiliates in the room, to the extent that you can try, or even a binary option skin, to the extent you have a white label and there's an underlying platform like Spot On that's profiting in part from commissions that come in, to the extent that you can seek indemnification or have a written indemnification in writing with the merchant, that would really be helpful. Why? Because if you go to a regulator and say, I actually was told, X or Y. I mean, every affiliate says this when they get in trouble. Every advertiser, every now. I thought this, I thought that, I thought the other thing. They told me the product did this. I didn't know, I was just selling someone else's product. okay, if you get that in writing, if you get a representation from the company that the product label does what it says, I mean, we're talking about binary options a lot, but this comes up in dietary supplements too, because they're all white labeled. And if you could go back to the plant, most of which are right over the border in New Jersey, and you could tell them, hey, you know, what are your actual ingredients? You know, is the main ingredient really this? Because a lot of times the affiliate will say it is down the road, but is it really? You know, can you represent that to us? I mean, I'm not looking to come in and put a white lab coat and come test it. I just want you to tell me that your label is accurate. Because in the FDA arena, which diet pills and e-cigs and everything else sometimes spill over to, you want to make sure that you're not misrepresenting anything. So if you're going to rely on a merchant's representation, then why not just ask them to put that in writing? Now, that all goes to your leverage, and I don't know how much leverage you all have with your merchant, if that's a relevant scenario. So, you know, obviously it's not always going to be possible, and if you're just starting out, it may be impossible. And seeking indemnification may be like, you know, I got 180,000 partners, you know, why don't you hit the road? I don't need another one. You know, this is how I can help you, I don't need you to help me. So it all depends, I realize that, but it's always something you should try to keep in mind. Sometimes, you know, affiliates especially, or advertising agreements, you know, they're like a paragraph and there's like nothing in them and you can't negotiate. You get these insertion agreements that, you know, look like they've been used for like 40 years and there's nothing you can do about it. But you know what? As you build up sales and as you generate commissions, who knows, you know? You can never get anything if you don't try, so. So that's my only point there. So I wanted to use the last 15 minutes of the presentation just to kind of take any questions or deal with any, you know, real case scenarios or anything that you might ask, and it can be on this or anything else that we talked about. It's hard to believe I've been speaking for 45 minutes, but it's 1:15.
What is the liability of an affiliate who is not directly advertising in the United States but has a website accessible to people in the United States? What is their liability to the CFTC, especially if they are United States residents?
Well, so far the CFTC hasn't gone after affiliates in that scenario, but what I would tell you is that if all you are is an affiliate who's trying to drive traffic to a US-facing binary option skin, I would want to make sure that you're not making any representations about the legality of it. I think one of the interesting things that we saw in the bank to binary case is that the CFTC was taking the position that you didn't, you know, your affiliates didn't even warn the US-facing consumers that the CFTC considered this illegal. Had you done that, we might have taken a different position. I find that hard to believe that that's really true, but I mean, if you're an affiliate, I mean, as long as you have some sort of authority over what it is your ad can say or what your message is, I mean, if you can say that the CFTC has taken the position that, you know, certain trading on commodities is regulated by the CFTC and may not be considered legal.
Just a regular risk disclosure area.
Yeah.
Cover that same.
I mean, I would think that that's your starting point, for sure. Go ahead.
So an affiliate network is an intermediary between the binary options, skin, if you will, and the affiliate themselves, and often the intermediary between the affiliate program of said binary options company and the affiliates, what is our?
Well, I mean, I think your liability is the same, and I think you're in a better position to be able to monitor what your affiliates are doing, and it seems to me that you could probably be in a better position to control the messaging that your affiliates are giving out. So, I mean, you could insist on that. So, you know, again, it's all a question of risk taking. But the networks can control through their insertion orders or through whatever. What's your relevant agreement between you and the affiliates? What do you call that? So, I mean, your terms and conditions, you might want to say in the terms and conditions that you cannot disclose that this is legal in the US, or that you have to say that the CFTC has taken issue, or you have to say that you're not representing and making any warranties about the legality of whether or not, you know, you could say that it's complex, you could say that it's subject to a myriad of regulations. Yeah. Well, it's simple, but the problem is that, you know, those disclosures cut into sales and profits, so not everyone wants to make them. David. Yeah, and keeping all of that, I mean, everything that David said is right, and keeping all of that in a folder someplace accessible, proof and documentation. I mean, you know, the practical way of thinking about it is the FTC, the CFTC, and the SEC can only bring so many cases. So who are they going to go after? They're going to go after people making the most money, clearly, and the people who are generating the most consumer complaints. So when they knock on your door, they're going to be there because they think you're part of something that was making a lot of money. They think you're there because they think you're part of the problem. So to the extent that you show any evidence that goes to that issue of, you know, either we're not directly interfacing with the patron, and on top of that, here's the message we were pushing out to our affiliates in our terms and condition. I mean, that's great. I mean, they're not necessarily looking to make cases against affiliates. They want to take the merchants out of the market. The FTC, on the other hand, has been bringing cases against affiliates themselves.
All of this lies along the spectrum, because you sort of limited the spectrum with the company that's out there affirmatively telling lies, saying we are registered with the CFTC or the SEC, because there are companies that make those false claims not to be. Those lie all the way at the end of one spectrum. And you move through a whole spectrum of various kinds of warnings and disclosures to the people who say, you know, who put up, you know, something bright like that, red that says, warning, this may not be legal, which obviously is not terribly conducive to sales. So obviously the trick is to find the place in the middle of that spectrum where you provided yourself with sufficient protection that your consumer is on notice that there is at least an issue without actually driving them okay.
Right, and I mean, for a network, I mean, messaging is very important, and also building the reputation, like David said, that you're the type of network that always told affiliates X, you know, oh, I never, you know, you get people, they always were telling me that this could be problematic. I mean, the CFTC is going to be sending out investigators into the market, so they're going to see all that. I mean, the type of stuff, by the way, that affiliates discuss on Skype with their networks is unreal. I mean, these Skype transcripts, when they come in as deposition exhibits, I just can't believe that people actually say these things and then say them on Skype as if it's some sort of protected, you know, communication. Well, text messages, yeah, but you know, in this industry, they all think that Skype and instant messaging is somehow protected. Although now with, you know, Snowden and everything, I guess everybody knows nothing's protected. So, so are there any other questions about anything else we could talk about? No? All right, well, we're still around and we're upstairs, and thank you very much for listening.